Alrighty, good evening. No tea tonight. We have a little bit of adult sodas waiting for me later, but what we're gonna do is talk about our listening to your car. Your car is gonna be telling you a story as it goes about its daily journey of taking care of you to work and back, to the errands, picking up the kids, whatever it is. Your car is gonna be talking to you. The question is, are you smart enough to listen to it? Very bright man told me when I was learning to work on cars, something mechanical is always going to tell you it's going to break long before it does. You just got to be smart enough to listen to it and pick up on the clues. Thanks, Dad. All right, so we're going to get going. We're going to talk about a few things here. All right, what are those clues? Well, what are they? Are there drips in the driveway? There's noises from the suspension? Is the starter cranking over slowly? What else is going on with the car? Is the radio not working the way it should? Are the windows going up slowly? What size of drips are in the driveway? What color are they? How big are they? How often are they? The funny thing is that you know darn well your car is telling you something. A lot of times we're procrastinating and don't want to listen to it because we're afraid of how much it's going to cost. All right, stay tuned for later. I'll also tell you a story relayed to me by a buddy of mine who ignored his car for a long enough time. Turned out, what was the problem? Stay tuned for later. All right, like I said, we're gonna talk about drips, we're gonna talk about noises, we're gonna talk about that gut feeling you have with your car. We're gonna get into the meat of it. Really important for those of you learning, even some of those older mechanics, we need to listen to our car. It's telling us a story. All right, without further ado, we're gonna get going. Alrighty, we're going to talk about your car and it's talking to you. So if you have a little bit of wobble in your steering wheel or some squealing up front, you need to investigate those things. They are important. The car is talking back to you. You need to listen. As I mentioned earlier, it's giving you clues. Now, we're going to go through each one of those things. Like if it's squealing up front, it's probably the brakes. The brakes aren't meant to squeal. If you start the car and you got some squealing going on, maybe you have a belt loose. Maybe you got something jammed up in there. How do you know the squirrels weren't active last night? They're dangerous little suckers. They will do all sorts of damage. You're hearing some really weird vibes in the background in the back of your car. It's vibrating like it's never done before. It's feeling weird. You got to investigate that. That could be a drive shaft going bad. You could have some shocks going bad. You have a bearing going bad. If you have a bearing going bad, that could turn into a major issue. Either a wheel will lock up or it can worse, it'll catch fire. So I don't want to scare you. That's not my intent. My intent is to give you some food for thought, to listen to those things, those noises. Those noises, you've never heard those before and you start to hear them. You need to investigate those. This video is only meant to teach you to think about those things. Now we're going to investigate how to troubleshoot in other videos, but right now, I just want you to think about, if you're hearing some noises, start investigating, start writing down those symptoms that you're hearing, and then start put the two and two together. I guarantee you, once you start writing them down, you will find the answer. My buddy Dean, and his car was dripping in the driveway, and he knew it was a major leak because it kept going, and he kept adding oil. He kept putting it off, and ignored it, and he was worried about it being something major, like a big bearing or a big seal on the engine or something on the transmission or whatever. He wasn't sure, but he knew as long as he kept adding oil, things would be good. Finally, he had enough of it one day and he crawled underneath his car, started looking around. Turns out all he had to do was tighten up 5 bolts on the oil pan and it tightened it back up and stopped it all. And this had been going on for, I don't believe how long he told me. I think he told me it had been going on for over 6 months. He knew darn well that the car was telling him something. He's a great mechanic. He just wasn't listening. He just chose to ignore it. Also, there's another theory out there that a lot of us mechanics that we work on things quite often will ignore something or we'll say, oh, well, don't worry about it. We'll get back to it later. All you guys watching my BMW episodes, my bike was talking to me. I just wasn't smart enough to listen to it. It was slow to crank over, slow to start. And then finally, just one day, it just wouldn't start very well. I finally could get it started, but it was telling me long before it actually gave up, hey, there's something wrong, you need to look at me. I just wasn't smart enough. Now, that's a scenario for us mechanics who are more experienced. We often will ignore something even though that we know how to fix it, or we just don't want to get around to it, or we're lazy. Now, for you newer people out there who are just learning, I would advise you to at least try not to fall in that habit and listen to your car, write down the scenarios, write down what's going on, and maybe try to put the puzzle together. I'm gonna give you an example. So my Chevy pickup, where I just bought not too long ago, maybe 3-4 months ago, parked it at the airport, went on a trip, come back from the trip, went to go start it, and it was cold out. It was like -2 out. It wasn't horribly cold. It cranked over slow, really slow, finally started. And then it shut down, just shut off. My heart panicked because it was late at night. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on with my car? Go in there, turn the ignition off, turn it back on, it finally starts. Well, it was telling me something. I didn't know what it was telling me, but I wasn't smart enough to figure it out at the time. In addition, what I've been noticing since I've really bought the vehicle is every time I shut the car off and turn it back on, the radio would keep its presets, but it would lose its time. So every time I turned the car back on, it would set back to 12 o'clock. I'm like, what is going on with this truck? This is crazy. In addition, occasionally when I was driving along, the dash would blink and flash. I'm like, what is going on with this truck? Now, when you look at the radio, you look at a slow cranking, you look at a flashing dash, you kind of think, oh, well, maybe it's a battery, maybe it's an alternator, what's going on? Or when the radio's resetting, you're blaming the radio. It's a bad radio, I'm gonna just replace the radio. I even thought that myself. I started digging into it, and that's where I'm telling you is newer people out there, this is for you to learn, is that forums can be your best friend. They can also be your enemy, so you have to be a little bit smart about how you use them. So I started digging in, I typed in radio issue, slow crank, dead start, all that sort of stuff. Turns out, somebody had already had this problem. That's the great thing about the internet. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, you just gotta hop on the wheel that's already made for you. You just gotta be smart enough to hop on the right wheel. Now, turns out, it wasn't the radio, it wasn't a bad battery, it wasn't an alternator, it was an ignition switch. Not the key, but the switch. So when you turn your switch on your car, it actually turns the switch down there, just like you're flipping on a light switch in your house, it's flipping that on. That switch is going bad. Turns out it's a very common problem on Chevy Silverados. Listen to your car, it's gonna tell you a story. You just gotta write down those symptoms and listen to it and break it down. Now, some of those mechanics out there have some really fancy software, they can put it all in there, it'll spit out about 10 different answers. And we're not talking using code scanners right now or car scanners to look at the computers. That'll be another episode. We're just talking about basic troubleshooting without having to get into your computer at all. It's gonna tell you a story. You gotta listen to it. Is that minivan slow starting? Is that door, electric automatic door, really starting to close slowly? Well, you might be thinking in the back of your mind, scared to death, oh, it's the motor going bad. Well, and really, it's probably not the motor. Your child dropped about too many Cheerios in there, about 500 Cheerios, and it's jamming up the tracks. Go in there and clean it out, and the motor's gonna be working fine, but it doesn't work really well against Cheerios or Gobstoppers or whatever the kids dropped in there. Kids are kids, they're gonna do that. There's probably about 1 billion goldfish down in there as well. All right, so other things that are acting up, is something on your dash, or your console not working correctly, or the switch is not working correctly. How often you spill coffee on your console on your way to work? That could be the problem. It's not a bad window, it's just a gummed up switch. All right, those are some things to think about. All right, a little bit more smaller episode today, but more of a philosophy and sort of a mentality. Start thinking about how you want to work on cars. For me, half the battle of working on a car is research. 9 times out of 10, I can tell you I've probably done 50% of the research before I even get underneath the car. Therefore, it makes it go faster. I know exactly what tools I need. I know where the part needs to be replaced. I've already ordered the part. I've also figured out what common causes of breakage when you try to take that part out. In addition, you've done your research. You know you've worked hard to try to figure out what this problem is. You may not be right always the first time, but you're gonna narrow it down and you're not just throwing parts at it. You're not throwing a brand new motor at that Caravan door that's trying to close when it's jammed up by 1 billion goldfish. So what we're talking about is listening to your car, start doing some homework and think about that. This is tying in. I'm trying to build these up to kind of make you think about how we're going to be a mechanic and think about how to put all the pieces together so you don't start throwing parts at it. It's a bad mechanic philosophy. I don't like it. I've tried to avoid it all my career as being a mechanic. Well, as my hobby as being a mechanic, I've tried to avoid it all that time. And I'm trying to encourage you to do the same. All right, If you're liking what you're seeing, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. It tells YouTube that you like what I'm doing and you're following along. Secondary, if you hit the notification bell, it'll tell you when I got stuff coming up. Follow my Instagram. I'll give you some sneak peeks of what's coming up on my more advanced stuff going on. Some of the younger mechanics out there, not as exciting. It's kind of a more educational, more kind of like schoolish thing. I hope I'm not too boring. I'm hoping I'm keeping a little bit of you guys excited about what the new projects are as well and following along. If you're a new mechanic, please follow along because there's stuff out there and I put little tidbits out there and different levels of knowledge for the new mechanic. Alrighty, appreciate you guys following along tonight. We'll talk to you guys later. Have a great one.